This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Welcome into the Practice Squad presents Throwback. This week we're going to be looking at the first two losses of the rest of the season because they don't win again. Losses at Minnesota, 34-24. Loss at Green Bay, 24-20. To this point in the season, the biggest takeaway I've had is that this team is really underperforming. I think they should be at least 6-2, maybe 7-1. Stroz, you agreed. This week felt a little bit different for me. In particular, the first time the Lions played the Vikings this season, they absolutely should have won. Christian Ponder was a garbage bag. I still think he's a terrible quarterback, but in this game, I can't believe I'm looking at the numbers right now. I cannot believe Christian Ponder went 24 for 32. I swear he went 45 for 45. All he did was complete 6-yard passes after 6-yard pass after 6-yard pass after 6-yard pass. I didn't know there was anyone playing defense before the first down marker.
It was a weird game because you can normally count on Christian Ponder to just be a total trash bag. And in this game, he felt like he was a comparable, capable quarterback who had no problem slicing and dicing this Detroit Lions team up. And it was 6-yard pass, 6-yard pass, 6-yard pass. Next thing you know, he airs it out for 54 and hits Jarius Right.
Hold on.
And then it's back to 6-yard
something.
pass, 6-yard pass, 6-yard pass.
This man had a 54-yard completion and still finished with 6.5 yards per pass.
When you go back and rewatch that pass, he stepped so hard into that pass, and he threw with everything he had to get it down that field.
I actually didn't think he did anything special. In 2011, a ton of memorable games. In 2012, maybe a couple, but not many. But as we were going through this game, I realized this was a memorable game for me. Like, I forgot originally, but I remembered this as the game where Christian Ponder never missed a damn pass. Like, this came to my memory. And it was like, last season, Jim Harbaugh and the 49ers exposed the Lions in that they couldn't, like, they over-adjusted to everything. If you had a receiver in motion to the outside, they all bid on it. If you had a play action, they all bid on it. If you had a pulling guard, they all bid on it. This Lions team doesn't fall for the same thing. And I actually speculated when we did our off-season episode, the reason I thought things went wrong in 2012 is because the blueprint for how to beat them was out. I don't think the blueprint was the same in 2012. Up until this point, they beat themselves. They should have been 6-2. Watching this game, I think the answer became very clear. The secondary's garbage. Don't waste your time trying to get long shots because the defensive line, I think, and I'll talk about this more in the Packers game, I think the defensive line has been much, much better this year. It had good moments last year. I think even in this game and consistently they get pressure on the quarterback. So stop wasting your time trying to make big plays because they're going to give you 5, 6, 7, 8 yards on every play. And this is the game that exposed that.
Yeah, I think the secondary's been a problem the entire season. I'm not willing to go so far to say that the defensive line played a great game because we're going to talk about Adrian Peterson, and he absolutely ate them alive this
later
game.
In this game.
A little bit.
Ate them alive early on. I think because we need to remember, this is Adrian Peterson, top 10 running back all time, Adrian Peterson? Mm-hmm. Like, this is the prime of his career, so I'm not going to knock them for everything. He really broke things off later on in the game.
I mean, he had, if you take out his long run, he had a long run of 61 yards. If you minus that, he still finished with 110 yards. And for me, that's a lot because I agree with you. I think this defensive line was very good. And I think we've praised them over the course of this podcast to this point. You know, if you go back through the beginning of the 2012 season, I think we have been very high on this defensive front and the things that they have been able to do. And one of my first notes on this game was how impressed I was with Nick Fairley. And you brought this up a couple of weeks ago. He's really stepped up. Like, there are times where he will be in a gap and he will totally blow a play up. And he is such a big time contributor on that defensive front. It's absolutely nuts. And if you go back and you look through the stat sheets, he's usually finishing in the top 4, top 5 for the defense with tackles, forced fumbles, sacks. He's always bringing up a ton of stats that are super high with things that you're looking for from a D tackle or a D end, and he's always right up there. I think this defensive front has been good. I think this game, not so much. And I think it goes to who they went up against. Adrian Peterson, prime of his career, he feasted today. And Christian Ponder had a really, really good game. Those two players for Minnesota really stretched this game out because there was a point there where I was like, cool, Detroit's back in this and it's kind of a game. And then all of a sudden, Minnesota's like, nope, never mind. See ya.
If Adrian Peterson feasted, Christian Ponder just ate chip after chip after chip.
He just
snacked for 24 hours. You mentioned it looked like it was going to become a game. The offense was useless early on in this game. I thought Stafford was atrocious to start this game. He started figuring things out and it became a game. Unfortunately, when that happened, the defense fell apart. And that was when Adrian Peterson had a 61-yard run. I think he had another long one. The defense just kept things close early, but once the offense started moving the ball, it was like the defense disappeared.
Yeah, so there comes a point in this game, and it's late in the fourth quarter. No, it's early in the fourth quarter. Early in the fourth quarter, Minnesota starts to kind of pick and pop, and they get everything they want. And they're putting together drives where it's 8 plays, 6 plays, and then all of a sudden it becomes 2 plays and they're scoring touchdowns. And then it's like back to back 2 plays and then it's 5 plays. You know, it wasn't ever like an extended drive. There was no point where Minnesota was just kind of milking the clock. The defense ends up crumbling. And I think it's part of the reason is they just got tired. I think they got wore out because like you said, the offense wasn't there. The offense didn't do a very good job of controlling the ball, maintaining the ball. So the defense ends up going out there for extended periods of time early in this game. And then by the time the fourth quarter rolls around, I just think they're gassed. And then you've got Adrian Peterson trucking down the field for 61 yards to score a touchdown. And there was nobody even close to this man.
Now, I am curious watching because the offense was so useless early on. What changed in the second half more than anything is that they started force-feeding Calvin. And I didn't feel like, because there's different types of force feeding Calvin, right? There's throwing it up and making him go get it, and there's just giving it to him because he's getting open. I didn't feel like it was just forcing him the ball, like it was there. I don't know what happened if Calvin started playing better in the second half, if Minnesota made a defense adjustment that didn't work. It just makes me wonder, because in the second half, Calvin went insane. In fact, they flashed a graphic. In the first half, Calvin had 4 receptions for 47 yards. That means in the second half, the man had 8 receptions for 160? 8 receptions for 160 yards and a touchdown in the second half. I mean, once you did that, it opened up the entire offense. The running game wasn't there in this one, but they had a little bit more of it in the second half. Joik Bell, 7 receptions the second behind Calvin, but you had a Titus Young touchdown, which by the way was a dime throw by Stafford. He seems to have a rapport with Titus Young that I don't necessarily remember. In putting like, because we've seen at least 1 touchdown like this. I think we might have seen 2 already, where he puts the ball low and Titus Young has to kind of scoop it, like get underneath it, but it keeps it away from everybody else. We had another one of those in this game. Titus Young didn't have a great game, but I thought that play was great. And another touchdown, or third touchdown to Pettigrew. But all that started coming. It started opening up when Calvin Johnson started dominating the game.
And Calvin Johnson had a really good game. I think this is his first really complete game since probably week 2, maybe week 3. And remember, after week 4, he gets banged up. He has that concussion from Chad Greenway, and he has a little bit of nerve damage. He can't feel his hands. I'm going to talk about some balls slipping through his hands in the Green Bay game, but in this game...
He had a bad fumble in this one that I thought ended the game.
It did. But in this game, it looks like he's feeling better. I don't want to say he's 100%, but it looks like he's feeling a little bit better. The one thing I did notice, and this goes back to your point about them forcing the ball to Calvin Johnson. To me, the first half really felt like it was a real balanced attack. It felt like they tried to run the ball. They tried to establish the run. When that wasn't working, they did try to pass, but Matthew Stafford seemed a little bit out of sorts. Second half comes around, and it's like, we gotta get Calvin the ball. We've gotta start picking up some chunk plays. And next thing you know, like you said, everything opens up. Everything opens up, and the run game wasn't great in this game at all. But you were able to establish a couple things on the ground, and what you ended up with was you had receivers getting open. And you're right, there is this connection with Titus Young. To me, I can't wait to see where it goes horribly awry for Titus Young. I'm still waiting to see it because he's had a really good week, followed by another really good week, followed by another really good week, followed by this week, which his numbers aren't great, but he did a really good job in this game. So I'm interested to see when it all falls apart for Titus Young and what happens. I thought Brandon Pettigrew had a very subpar game in this game, and to the point that we've made as we did the 2011 season. As Brendan Pettigrew goes, so did this game. Brandon Pettigrew did not play a very good game. A lot of targets, a lot of drop balls, a lot of missed passes, and he hurt this team with some of his underneath routes and some of the picks and pops for Matthew Stafford to kind of get into his rhythm and to pick up some tough yards.
It's been tough to blame anything on Brandon Pettigrew to this point because I think the team has been terrible. In fact, this felt like a unique game in where right now I think the Lions should be 6-2. I think they had stupid, awful mistakes kill them in most of their games. It didn't feel that way in this one. It felt like that Minnesota had found something Detroit wasn't able to stop and took advantage of it. And on offense, they were not good, but they weren't killing themselves with individual bad plays. It was an off day. Like I said, I thought Matthew Stafford was really bad early on in this game. I don't think I'd say this was a bad game as a whole. He finished 28 of 42, 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. So the numbers tell you decent day, not a good enough completion percentage. I would call this one of the weaker performances of the season because to this point, I think there's been a theme of Stafford doing everything he can to give this team a chance to win, and it's just not good enough. This week, I don't consider him a positive, but he did play really well late. And the first touchdown that they scored, he threw like 3 or 4 straight dimes. It was like a 5-possession touchdown. They went like 80 yards, and all of them were perfect throws. But I do think what we saw is I think he struggled to get into rhythm because Minnesota stayed on the field for so long. Mm-hmm. And Detroit couldn't stay on the field because, as you said, no running game, drops. And like, because he never got into a rhythm, like they played the majority of this game with a below average Matthew Stafford. Yeah,
I don't think Matthew Stafford did a ton to help them win this game. And look, a lot of it's not his fault. I don't think he helped the defense in the first half. I don't think the defense helped him in the second half. I think this is really
couldn't
a
put
game
it all together in either.
Right. I think it was a game of 2 halves, and that's where this team kind of fell apart because the offense couldn't stay on the field to control anything and give the defense a breath. And then come the second half, the defense was just so tired. Minnesota just cut through them like a hot knife through butter. Now, the one thing I did think was curious to watch is Cliff Averill. Now, Cliff Averill gets a little bit banged up earlier this season, has a back injury against Minnesota. He ends up getting his bye week, and he comes back, and basically he's questionable for the rest of the season because of a back injury. In this game, he ends up suffering what appears to be a concussion, leaves in that third quarter with a concussion, and we talked about how this defense kind of started to fall apart in that third quarter. Cliff Averill's not there. And I'm not going to say Cliff Averill is the straw that stirs the drink for this defense, but he is a major part of this defensive front. He goes down, the defense starts to immediately suffer.
Well, I do think the middle has been dominant. Nick Fairley has taken such a massive step. Sue has been really good. In fact, I think as a whole, this rewatch makes me appreciate Sue a little bit more. I was always a Sue defender because people flipped out when he didn't have sacks, and that's just not fair on a defensive tackle. But I think rewatching it has really highlighted how big of a role he played. But you're right, the middle was dominant, Cliff Averill was very good, and Kyle Vanden Bosch kind of didn't show up. In fact, negatively, he's been the most, like, in terms of all these players, in my opinion of someone has changed most negatively of him. One super minor thing is the only note I have left on this game. We have been so spoiled by Sam Martin in recent history. Because Nick Harris isn't a bad punter.
Oh.
But it just feels like I keep waiting for the Lions to change field position on punts, and they can't do it. And the reason I bring that up, it's happened all season, but there was a punt in this game where they punted from the 10-yard line, and the Vikings took over at their own 45. And in my head, it's like, what the hell are you doing? And in reality, it's a little short. It's like a 35-yard punt. But a 40-yard punt's pretty standard. I went back and I looked through it, and Sam Martin has pretty much consistently been one of the best in the league at average air yards and average hang time. Meaning, normally you're sacrificing one for the other, right? If you're kicking it higher in the air for more hang time, it doesn't go as far. If you're kicking it further, you don't get as much hang time. He has led in both of those stats most of his career, and it's throwing me off watching these dudes who can't change field position, and it actually makes me a little nervous for the future Lions because he's on his way out.
Yeah. So
you probably didn't even notice it.
No. When you brought it up, I started to laugh, and I giggled because I did notice it. The special teams the special teams players, I should be a little bit more specific because the units as a whole aren't great, but the guys who are key, right? So your Stefan Logans, your Nick Harris's, your Jason Hanson's. Jason Hanson's very good. Nick Harris is, I would say he is mediocre. Now, Nick Harris came in earlier this year because they had, their original punter got hurt and has been placed on the IR. So Nick Harris is the guy that they brought in, and he's average. He's not great. He's not good. And you're right. He doesn't help this team flip field position. Here you go. I'm consistently average is what you could describe him as. And then factor in the hate for Stefan Logan that has come through this podcast.
Oh, and it's coming through next week.
It has not been good. The one thing I do want to mention before we move on to studs and duds, Calvin Johnson again stopped at the 1 yard line on one of the plays. He ends up getting a touchdown later on in this game, but he was stopped at the 1 yard line.
I mean, yeah, so that's 4, I believe, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Do you have anything else before we get into studs and duds?
Nope. Who's your stud?
My stud is Calvin, and I don't know that it's close. Calvin Johnson, absolutely dominant in the second half. Didn't do a whole lot in the first, but he wasn't non-existent. But in the second half, he was the entire reason that this offense let them get back in the game.
Yeah, I can't argue you, and I'm going to go Calvin Johnson as well. You could go Nick Fairley, because I thought Nick Fairley had a really good game this game, but I'm going to go Calvin Johnson. Again, he was the reason that this team was in contention to get back in and win this game. Now, he did have a costly fumble late, but up until that point, he was the only thing they had going on offense. Who's your dud?
All right, so I've only done this. I just went back and looked. I've only done this once this year. I'm actually going to give the dud to Stafford. I think for giving him a dud, it was a pretty good game. I didn't feel like, and you could give it to the secondary because Christian Ponder looked way too competent, but the secondary we know is bad, and I don't think Stafford lived up to the expectations he set for himself. I had thought for a large portion of this game that if he was on, they would have won until that Calvin fumble, because once that Calvin fumble happened, they were down 14. I want to say they were heading in 35, 40 yard line or so with 8 minutes left, and then he fumbled, and that was it. You were down 2 possessions and gave the ball back with 8 minutes left. You were heading in to score. Once that happened, it kind of just felt like this was just, Stafford was off. Calvin had a big fumble. The defense couldn't figure anything out. Like Christian Ponder made an incredible throw for a touch. Well, I don't know if he ended up getting the touchdown, but like a 50-yard throw to get to the 1 yard line. It just wasn't your game. But Stafford kind of got this team in a hole that they were never able to fight themselves out of.
I don't mind the Stafford nomination. I'm going to go with the front seven, though. And I'm going to go with the front seven as a collective. I think you have a theme. When a running back has a couple big runs, you like to blame the front seven. Well, I don't think there was enough pressure put on Christian Ponder either. We've talked about how competent of a quarterback he looked in this game. And I don't think he was only sacked twice. He was hit a couple times, but I don't think there was enough pressure by that defensive front. And I don't think the linebackers helped fill in the gaps. Adrian Peterson just took advantage of this front seven all game long. I don't think the secondary was very good, but I think more to a point, I think if the front seven put more pressure on Christian Ponder, it would have helped out that secondary a little bit more, and they would have been put in such precarious positions. Now, Adrian Peterson, I don't know how you don't give it to the defensive line or the defensive front when you have a running back, Scamper. I don't even want to say Scamper. Like, he bruised his way to 171 yards. And I know he did have a couple long runs, but man, in this game, it was like every time he touched the ball, he was picking up 7 yards, 10 yards, 14 yards. Next thing you know, he'd bust a big long one for 20. And then he was like right back to the grind. 4, 6,
See,
7.
I didn't feel that way.
No?
No, I didn't. I really didn't. And if you take off the 60-yard run, he averaged 4 yards per carry. And that is how these stats work. Like, you don't average 7 yards per carry if you don't break any big runs. I didn't think they shut him down, but I thought they kept him under control outside of 2 or 3 big runs. Now, that 60-yard run came after the offense had finally answered. So the timing of it was a problem, but I honestly, defensively, I'd have given it to the secondary before I'd have given it to the front seven because Christian Ponder looked competent, but he didn't look competent hitting deep balls. He was hitting 5, 6, 7 yard passes. Like, I just have a hard time blaming the defensive line when Christian Ponder completes a pass to Kyle Rudolph for 5 yards. So, again, I think this is the polar opposite of every other loss I've had this season. Every other loss they had this season, they were clearly the better team and made some stupid plays. They were outplayed in this game. They were beat consistently and at most positions. And it's funny because it's hard to watch, but it's not as angering. You know what I mean? Like, this one didn't leave me angry.
I felt like this team was just outclassed in this game.
Yeah, they were. And against a team that they looked way better than early on in the year, but.
Yeah. Whether they just didn't show up for this game, or whether they just couldn't get things going, or if it was one part of the team wasn't rolling and the other part was, and then they started carrying them, or the part that was letting them down early got going, and then the part that was carrying them faltered. This was such a disjointed, weird game that they weren't ever really in it. There was a point where it got close. They were within 7, and then Kelvin fumbles. Your best player puts the ball on the turf, and it goes the other way immediately for a touchdown. I think it was 2 plays, and they next thing you know, that 7-point lead balloons to a 14-point lead. This team couldn't recover.
All right, moving forward, the following week they fall again, 24-20 to Green Bay. That was at home, correct?
Yes.
Yes, this one was at home. I don't have a lot to say about this one. I think the first thing that comes to mind is, look, again, I gave the dud to Stafford on the last one. I didn't hate his game. I felt he didn't live up to the expectation he had set. Whew, it was a bad game. And I hope he doesn't look this bad the rest of the year. 17 of 39, 260 yards, a touchdown and 2 interceptions. To be fair, he did throw 1 interception that was returned for a touchdown. That was not a good throw, but always, always, always my rule is, as an NFL receiver, if you get 2 hands on the ball, you cannot drop it. And you sure as hell can't let it literally go right through to the guy behind you. That happened with the Tony Scheffler catch, and he was off all day to Tony Scheffler. The commentators pointed it out too. It just seemed like they weren't playing football together. Like, he was constantly underthrowing, overthrowing. Like, Tony Scheffler registered 10 targets, and there were 2 receptions. And there had to be at least 4 or 5 where the ball was nowhere near him.
And Tony Scheffler, to this point, for the last 2 seasons, has been one of his go-to guys, one of his more reliable receiving options. And for some reason, there's just something not right in the mix on this day. He was off all day long to Tony Scheffler. Matthew Stafford did not have a good game. Matthew Stafford also had a fumble, so he accounted for 3 turnovers in this game, on top of missing wide receivers. And like you said, just his completion percentage was absolutely brutal. He was bad. Matthew Stafford was bad in this game. All that being said, this team had a shot to win this game, and they faltered at the end, which I think was a little bit frustrating. Going back to Calvin Johnson real quick. We talked about his head injury. We talked about his broken fingers. We talked about him struggling to grip a football now and again. This game, so he had a really good game last game. This game, I think it starts to rear its head again. And I don't know if he gets hit. I don't know if he gets banged up a little bit. There was a helmet-to-helmet hit in this game, and I don't know if that maybe triggered some of that nerve damage that Calvin had, but Calvin did not have a great game Now, the yardage is nuts. He had 143 yards, okay? But he was targeted 11 times, had 5 receptions on those 11 targets, and he had a costly fumble where it just seemed like the ball fell right out of his hand. And there was a point in this game where he's just looking at his hands like he's talking to him, like, come on, work for me. And they just weren't working for him. I don't know if you noticed that or not.
Speaking, I didn't think he had the as bad of a game as you mentioned. He had a fumbling problem that we don't always acknowledge. I don't know when it started, if it had to do with some of the injuries he had this season. So there was that, but I thought as a whole, I thought he had a pretty good game. His touchdown was not a great throw. The only touchdown that Stafford threw was not a great throw. Calvin went and got it himself. No, I didn't have a major issue with Calvin Johnson in this one. Now, you talk about a bad fumble, though. Matt Stafford carries the ball, and I don't know if he does this as bad today as he did back then. The way he carries a football is wild. It just doesn't look. Did you notice that?
Yeah, it looked like a loaf of bread.
He took off running. He took off running 3 times last week, twice this week, and he scrambled on the pocket. I think that you can see the pressure he's taken all year long is getting to him. In fact, I mentioned that last week, that he seems to have a little bit of happy feet. He was sacked 5 times in this one. He ran it twice for 12 yards, and I promise you there were times he was running before throwing the ball away too. And I think that probably plays a role in why these last couple games weren't great. But you get some you get some quarterbacks who are lazy with the football, who like don't ever tuck it. But it's not that he doesn't ever tuck it. Like, it just looks like his arm is too big or something. Like, ideally you have your hand on it, your elbow on it, and it's like tucked in almost like your armpit. And then if you can't do that, when you got a running back running out, you see them tuck it just their hand and their elbow. It's like he can't tuck it in his hand and his elbow. It's like he tucks the ball in his wrist. Mm-hmm. And he had a play in this game where it looked like he was going to break for 10, 15 yards, and he gets hit from behind, and the ball's knocked out, and he don't even get tackled. The ball just pops out because he had no control on it, and that was terrible. Oh, and let me go here, because I said I was going to. Stefan freaking Logan. I don't hate him, but he has games where as a kick returner or a punt returner, you need to make either a positive impact or if returning is your secondary job, you need to be neutral. But this man, sometimes he just falls asleep, and I think he did in this one. So he had a fair catch, he called it at like the 12-yard line, or not fair catch, but he let the ball drop. It was down at the 1. 12 is like tough. You're supposed to catch it. Understandable that you don't. But the thing that drove me crazy is the ball didn't even bounce until there were Packers behind it. So it was pretty clear that ball wasn't going to the end zone. And then the worst one. Stroz, how often do you go back and rewatch a play?
Is this the one where he got bailed out by the referee?
No.
Oh, it's not that. Oh, because he had a play where he was totally bailed out by a referee.
I'm not even sure which one you're referring to. But
I'll go back and I'll watch 2 or 3 times sometimes if there's something that I need to see.
Per game. How often per game are you rewatching something?
Maybe
I'd say once or twice. Yeah, once or twice per game. The play I went back and rewatched in this one, because I just couldn't figure out how this happened. The Packers punted from their own 10. Their own 10! Like, you can't see me because we're not doing this video, but I'm staring into the camera right now. The Packers punted from their own 10, and Stefan Logan let the ball hit the 50-yard line. Explain to me how you couldn't feel the ball at the 50.
I don't have an answer.
I went back and rewatched it. I was like, was this punt like 20 yards? Because that would be the one explanation, right? It was a stupid low, short punt, and he couldn't get there. It was a 40-yard punt, which is like the literal definition of standard. He should have been waiting at the 50-yard line. He let it bounce, and it went all the way to the 30. This man added 20 yards to a punt because he was staring off into the distance. This guy had one job on the team, and it was to return punts and kickoffs, and he just fell asleep sometimes multiple times in the game. And when did he get bailed out? Because I don't remember that one.
So this one happened, I want to say it was probably third quarter. There was a play where he was up near midfield. They end up kicking it. It basically goes through his hands, and the referees blow an early whistle. And there's like 3 Packers around him. Like, he muffs it, and he muffs it bad. And the referees end up blowing the whistle for it to be dead, and he just kind of scoops it up because they all pulled up.
I injured myself screaming. This was so angering. Like, this 2012 team as a whole is frustrating, but these plays by Stefan Logan, here's the thing, I don't have a whole lot about this game. They just played terrible, and the fact that they stayed close in this one, not only stayed close, the Packers scored a game-winning touchdown with like 3 minutes left. And by the way, holy crap, what a throw. I just watched the end of the Packers game before we started recording this. Aaron Rodgers literally just like, if he were to draw the perfect route for a ball to the end zone for the game-winning touchdown, this would have been it. And it went right through 2 defenders.
Randall Cobb was getting molested the whole time he was in the end zone, too.
It was an incredible throw. I don't know how the Lions played close in this one. I mean, you know what? I do need to say this. Mikel LaShore, how many times are we going to watch a running back and think, this guy's better than I remember? Like, why are our memories so skewed? Because this guy made some plays.
He did. I just don't think he was ever a fantastic running back. He made quite a few plays, and I thought this was another good game for him, but I think he's just inconsistent because you go back to the Minnesota game last week, not so good. But this week, he's 19 carries, 84 yards, and he has a touchdown, and he's just falling forward every time. He's constantly falling forward.
He wasn't perfect. I'm not trying to argue he was a stud, but I just remember this team being so much worse at running the football. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I'd tell you, they're pretty confident at running the football with the one exception of being when they need to. They just can't rely on it. But like, in the middle of a close game, if you just give a handoff to LaShore from here or there, he's gonna do it. He did. His touchdown in this one too was a hell of a touchdown. Mm-hmm. Short yardage touchdown, dude just forced his way through a pile. I haven't even been looking at my notes in this one because I didn't have many.
Riley Reef comes in for Jeff Backus in this game. I thought Riley Reef looked really, really raw in this game. I think this is part of the reason why he didn't immediately take over as a starter, either at a right tackle or a left tackle position, because he looked all sorts of out of sorts. And Matt Stafford was sacked 5 times in this game. And I think there was a lot of pressure that was coming from that left side where Riley Reef stepped in. And I just don't think he was ready for that spot this season. I think he was a player who needed another year to develop. I don't know if you noticed that or not.
I didn't necessarily notice specifically. I did notice that he was in because they pointed it out. And I noticed that Stafford was running for his life, but it didn't feel like it was exclusively coming from anywhere in particular.
Stafford was hit 8 times and he was sacked 5.
I will say
he was pretty roughed up this game.
The defense in the Vikings game felt like they played really well early and fell apart late. Defense played really well in this one. The Packers only scoring 24 on you. That's a pretty good day. Now, James Starks was the running back, 25 carries, 74 yards, probably played a role. But even Aaron Rodgers didn't tear you apart. The Lions actually dominated possession in this one and way more plays on offense.
And if you take away one of those touchdowns, because that was a pick 6 for Matt Stafford, the defense only gave up 17 points.
Oh, it was a pick 6 and the fumble by Stafford was a field position changing fumble as well. Another interception for 20 yards. Honestly, like the offense, this is not something we've been able to say a lot. The offense lost this game. And this is the Packers team after this game went to 7-3. I would say that this game was a game where if you get the typical Matthew Stafford, you might win. I wouldn't say they should have won this game, but I think that this is a game, if you want to put it on Matthew Stafford, I'm okay with that.
No, I agree with you. I think if you get a typical Matt Stafford game where he's not turning the ball over, he's not trying to do too much, he's not fumbling the ball, he throws a couple touchdowns and his number, he throws for maybe 300 yards. I think you're going to have a much better outcome. This game, he just didn't show up. I mean, I don't know how many more notes you have to get to, but I'm going to foreshadow this. In my duds, he's one of many of my duds. I've got a few for this game.
I'm good to go there if you are.
Let's go to duds. So I've got Stafford, I've got the O-line, and I've got the pass game as a whole. And I think all of those things kind of come together. If I have to pick one, I'm going to go with Matt Stafford in this game.
Yeah, I agree. The offensive line especially needs to be on there too because they were awful. But Stafford was bad. I wish we had kind of like tried to keep a power ranking of just Stafford games just for our own entertainment value. I don't know if this was the worst because he had a couple bad ones last year. In fact, I think Stafford was my dud in close to half the games last year. Maybe not quite as many, but 5 or 6. This is going to be back to back. Stafford's the easy dud in this one for me, unless you wanted to go offensive line. I'm going to be honest with you. I come into 90% of these knowing who my dud is and who my stud is. I'm still kind of sitting on my stud. You have anyone in particular?
Oh yeah, Nick Fairley I thought had a really nice game. 4 tackles, 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble. I thought Nick Fairley was heads and tails the best defensive player in this game.
Yeah, no, Nick Fairley stood out in this one, and that's one of the problems is a lot of times when we do this, games have similar notes, and I actually wrote in this one, I hadn't gotten to it, but one note I had was the defensive line is noticeably better this year, which of course, the reason I didn't get to it is because I talked about it in the last game. I thought that you had a franchise tagged Cliff Averill who was fired up and playing well this year. You had a Nick Fairley who had gotten significantly better, and you had a Sue who was obviously elite. I think I'm going to go with the defensive line as a whole, or at least the interior of the defensive line, because Sue had a couple plays too. I know he got held on at least one, would have been sacked, and it was called the hold that forced a 2nd and long, I believe. It's funny, because I think you could honestly give it to the whole defense, because even that game-winning touchdown, like you said, they were absolutely mugging Randall Cobb, who caught that game-winning touchdown. You know, I do need to, I'm going to go backwards real quick. There was one play that I had a major frustration with. On that game-winning drive by the Packers, Jermichael Finley broke loose for a 40-yard play. He's not a dude who should have ever been breaking loose. But outside of that, I thought the defense had a really good game.
Yeah, the defense I thought played pretty well. I mean, you kept Aaron Rodgers contained for most of this game. I don't feel like at any point it felt like the defense lost this game for you. So as we kind of talked through this, I think the offense is the one that blew it for you.
I am going to give the stud to the defensive line specifically, but I think I don't have many complaints on the defense as a whole. Coming up next week, more losses, and one of them very, very memorable. A loss on Thanksgiving against the Houston Texans. And why is it that 2 years in we have to have 2 games that are memorable for Jim Schwartz? They follow that up with a home loss to the Indianapolis Colts. Both of those games very close, 3 points or less. If you're in for the heartbreak, watch them with us. If you're in it just for the deep dive of what these teams looked like and why they are where they are now, all you need to do is listen. Thanks for hanging out with us. This is the Practice Squad presents the Throwback.